For most of modern history, growth has felt like the solution to everything. More industry meant more jobs, more wealth meant a better life. And for a long time that was true. But what if growth has a hidden cost? What if the same force that made modern civilization richer can also, if pushed too far, make life more expensive, more unstable, and eventually worse? That was the question a group of MIT researchers asked in 1972, and more than 50 years later, their warnings still won't go away. Because this was never really a story about one dramatic day when society suddenly collapses. It was about something quieter than that. What happens when an economy built on endless expansion starts outrunning the systems holding it up? The researchers built a computer model called World3. It tracked the biggest forces underneath modern civilization: population, industrial output, food production, natural resources, pollution, and living standards. And then it asked a brutally simple question: what happens if all of these keep growing in a world that can't? At first, the answer looked great. Industry rose, food production climbed, population increased, living standards improved, everything looked like progress. And that is what made the warning so disturbing. The danger didn't begin when everything looked broken. It began while everything still looked successful. That's the trap. A society can look stronger than ever on the surface, while quietly becoming more stretched, more dependent, and less resilient underneath. Think of a household doing well for years. Better house, nicer car, more bills, more subscriptions, more commitments built on the assumption that next month will be fine. From the outside, it looks like success, but underneath, one repair bill, one rise in living costs, one lost paycheck can suddenly expose how little margin was really there. That was the deeper point of the MIT model. Not that society vanishes overnight, but that growth itself can create fragility when it depends on ever-rising inputs, ever-rising consumption, and ever-rising pressure on the systems below it. And when that happens, decline doesn't show up with sirens. It can arrive as slower growth, higher costs, more volatility, a world that still functions but feels harsher to live in. And that is where this stops being abstract, because for a lot of people that already sounds familiar. Housing feels harder, energy shocks spread through everything, food prices jump fast, one disruption ripples through the whole economy. That does not mean the model was perfectly right, but it does mean the core idea is not absurd. Now, to be fair, MIT did not prove society will collapse by 2040. That's the sensational version people repeat. World3 was a scenario model, not a prophecy. It wasn't saying this exact future is guaranteed. It was saying something more useful than that. If growth keeps colliding with physical and ecological limits, prosperity may not keep rising forever. It may overshoot first and weaken later. And here is the reason people still talk about it. Later researchers compared that old model with what happened in the real world, and the broad direction was uncomfortable. Not perfect, not exact, but not wildly wrong either. Close enough that people had to keep taking it seriously. Because this is not just an environmental story, it is an economic one. At the deepest level, an economy is how a society turns energy, materials, labor, and knowledge into living standards. And if resources get harder to secure, if shocks become more frequent, if the system becomes more fragile, then growth itself starts changing character. It stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like pressure. That is the real warning. Not that one day everything suddenly ends, but that a society can keep growing on paper while life gets worse in practice. You can see how this works in ordinary life. A family can survive one hit. Maybe the rent goes up. Maybe the electricity bill spikes. Any one of those can be handled, but stack them together and suddenly the problem is no longer one bad event. It's that there is no cushion left. Economies work the same way. A drought hurts harvests. That pushes up food prices. High energy costs hit transport and manufacturing. Households cut spending, businesses slow down, governments borrow more, confidence weakens. That is how stress moves through a system, not always as collapse, often as a slow loss of resilience. And maybe that is the most unsettling part. The biggest threat to a modern economy may not be one giant disaster. It may be a slow buildup of pressure that makes ordinary life steadily worse, while the system still looks normal from a distance. That is why this old MIT warning still matters. Not because it gave us a magical date, but because it challenged one of the most comfortable assumptions in modern life. that growth will keep making life better, and whatever breaks along the way can always be fixed later. So when people say MIT predicted society would collapse, that's too simplistic. But when they say modern growth can create the conditions for decline if it outruns the systems supporting it, that becomes much harder to dismiss. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. Do you think modern growth is still making life better overall? Or are we starting to confuse growth with progress? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.